See, Garrick Voss didn't fire Mara Ellison quietly. He did it in front of every man on the ranch, his voice loud enough to carry across the frozen yard, his finger pointed at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of his boot. See, get off my land, he said. You gave water to a stranger I told you to leave. See, that makes you stupid, and I don't keep stupid help. See, the men stood there. Not one of them spoke. Mara was 18 years old, had nowhere to go, and owned nothing but a worn canvas bag and a silver locket her grandfather left her. See, outside the temperature was dropping. The man she'd helped was gone. See, and the only person in Cinderwash who'd ever given her a roof over her head was now pointing at the gate. See, if you were her, what would you have done? If this story grabs you the way I think it will, please subscribe to this channel right now. See, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from, because I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. See, now let's go back to that frozen night and find out who Mara Ellison really was. See, the well at Iron Hollow Ranch had been dry for 6 weeks before the night everything changed. See, that was the thing people outside Cinderwash never understood. The drought didn't just kill grass and shrink rivers. See, it killed patience. It killed generosity. It made men into something narrower and harder than they'd been before, because every drop of water carried a dollar sign, and every act of kindness was a subtraction from a dwindling account. See, Garrick Voss understood this better than anyone, and he used it the way some men use a knife deliberately, and with real pleasure. See, Mara had understood this too, which is why she worked harder than she was paid to and kept her head lower than her pride wanted. See, she'd been at Iron Hollow for 14 months. See, she'd started the week after her grandfather Elias died, arriving with blistered boots, a letter she'd written herself pretending to be a reference from a neighboring spread, and a face so young that Garrick's foreman, see, Calder Rusk, had actually laughed when she asked for work. See, she got the job anyway, not because Garrick believed in her, but because she'd asked for 60 cents on the dollar of what the men earned, and Garrick liked saving money above almost everything else. See, by the end of her first month, she was outworking the men at 60 cents on the dollar. See, by the third month, she'd stopped minding. She had a cot in the corner of the equipment shed, one meal included in her arrangement, and just enough leftover wages to buy a pair of wool socks from the supply wagon when the cold set in. See, it wasn't dignity, but it was survival, and Mara had learned early that survival and dignity didn't always come in the same package. See, her grandfather had taught her differently, of course. See, Elias Ellison had been the kind of man who would give the last biscuit off his plate to someone who hadn't asked for it, who believed that your character wasn't what you were when things were easy, but what you chose when things were hard. See, he'd told her that once, sitting on the porch of their small claim property, watching a dust devil spin itself apart in the field. See, the test, he'd said, isn't what you do when it costs you nothing. See, anybody can be generous when it's cheap. Mara had thought she understood that. See, she didn't know yet what it was going to cost her. See, the night the stranger arrived, Mara was finishing her last task of the evening, checking the water barrels they stored behind the equipment shed. See, with the main well drawn down to almost nothing, Garrick had started rationing water with the kind of grim control that made even the horses nervous. See, every barrel was accounted for, every ladle was counted. See, if you were caught drinking outside your allotment, Garrick docked your wages without discussion. See, she heard something before she saw anything. A sound she couldn't immediately identify, not quite a groan, not quite a breath. See, something wet and ragged that didn't belong to the night. See, she held her lantern out and swept the light around the base of the well, and that's when she saw him. See, he was lying on his side with his knees pulled toward his chest, the way people lie when something hurts so badly that curling into themselves is the only response that makes sense. See, he was dressed in plain, dark clothes, traveling clothes, no particular quality to them, and there was blood dried in a dark stripe from his left ear down his neck. See, his breathing was shallow and too fast. One arm was held at a wrong angle, not broken but misplaced, the shoulder sitting in a socket it had partially abandoned. See, Mara stood there for a full 5 seconds. She counted them later in her memory. See, 5 seconds where she could have turned around and said she hadn't seen anything. See, she set the lantern on the edge of the well instead. See, hey, she said. Hey, can you hear me? The man's eyes opened. See, they were gray or some color close to gray, and despite everything wrong with the rest of him, they were sharp. See, alert in a way she hadn't expected. Whatever had happened to his body, his mind was still running. See, water, he said. One word. Barely a word at all, more a direction than a request. See, Mara looked at the barrel behind her. She looked at the calculations she'd been doing in her head for the past 60 seconds. See, the water was rationed. Using any of it without authorization was a fireable offense. Garrick had been explicit about that, and Garrick's idea of explicit was usually accompanied by a demonstration that nobody forgot quickly. See, the man on the ground made a sound that wasn't quite language. See, she uncapped the barrel and filled the ladle. He drank 3 ladlefuls before he could push himself halfway upright, and even that much movement made him flinch hard enough that she could see the pain travel through him like a current. See, his left hand went to his ribs instinctively, and he pulled a breath in through his teeth. See, ribs, she said. I know. At least 2. The way you're moving. See, he looked at her. There was something almost amused in it, despite everything. See, you a doctor? No. I've had cracked ribs, you move like that. She crouched beside him, close enough to look at the shoulder properly. See, that's dislocated. You've been walking with that? See, some. Who did this to you? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. See, then people who didn't want me where I was. It wasn't an answer. See, she filed it away. You need that shoulder set. It's going to get harder the longer you wait. See, I know that too. Do you want me to do it? Another pause. See, he looked at her steadily, measuring something she couldn't read. See, then he nodded. She'd seen it done twice. Once when a wrangler had gone over his horse, and once when her grandfather had fallen from a roof section he'd been patching. See, she understood the mechanics. She also understood it was going to hurt him in a way that made everything he was currently feeling seem mild. See, brace yourself against the well, she said, and don't yell the foreman sleeps light. See, he moved to the well, and she positioned herself, got her hands where they needed to be, and felt him lock every muscle in his body against what was coming. See, she counted to 3 in her head and didn't give him the 3. See, she did it on 2. He didn't yell. He made a single compressed sound through his teeth and then went very still, and she felt the joint seat back into place under her hands. See, done, she said. He stayed still for a moment with his forehead resting against the stone rim of the well. See, then he pulled in a long breath and let it out slowly, and some of the tension went out of his body all at once. See, thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet. You need to be somewhere that isn't this yard before Garrick wakes up. See, Garrick. Voss, the man who owns this ranch. Something shifted in his expression that she couldn't parse at all, too brief, too contained. See, he nodded. And Mar, I work here, a beat. See, worked here probably, depending on who saw me. She hadn't said that to get sympathy. See, it was just the truth landing on her with full weight for the first time. See, using unauthorized water, treating a stranger who'd arrived with no explanation. See, Garrick didn't need a serious reason to make an example of someone, and this was well past the threshold. See, she helped him to the equipment shed, which was warmer than the yard and had the benefit of being positioned where the house windows didn't face. See, she found the old woolen blanket she kept on the shelf under her cot and gave it to him. See, she had 1 candle left from her personal supplies, and she lit it so he'd have light when she was gone. See, he watched her do these things without speaking, not passively, actively, the way someone watches when they're paying precise attention to something they're cataloging. See, you don't know who I am, he said. It wasn't a question. See, you're a hurt man in my shed, Mara said. That's enough to know right now. See, what if I told you that helping me was going to cost you something? See, already figured it would, and you did it anyway. See, she looked at him then, straight and tired. My grandfather had a thing he used to say. See, about the test of character only happening when there's something real on the line. She pulled her coat tighter. See, I've been holding on to that for a while. Figured I'd better mean it when it got tested. She stood. See, sleep. The shed will be cold, but it's better than the yard. See, she started for the cot, and he spoke once more, quietly, from the blanket. See, you may have lost a bed tonight, Mara, but you haven't lost your future. See, she turned to look at him. He was already settling back, eyes closing, breathing steadier than it had any right to be given what he'd just been through. See, she almost asked him what he meant. She let him sleep instead. See, what she did not know, could not have known, was that Garrick Voss had not been asleep. See, he'd been standing at the far window of the main house in the dark, with a cup of something cold he'd forgotten to drink, watching the lantern move around the yard. See, he'd seen her by the well. He'd watched her bring the stranger to the shed. See, he didn't need to see the water ladle to know she'd used it. See, Garrick was the kind of man who kept lists. Not on paper in his head, a running ledger of obligations and offenses, what people owed him, and what they'd cost him. See, he'd been adding to Mara's column for weeks. The way she looked at him sometimes. See, the way she answered his direct questions with correct answers that somehow felt like arguments. See, the way the other workers watched her and not him when she was in the yard. See, he'd been waiting for a clean reason. She'd just handed him one. See, Mara heard his boots on the equipment shed floor before she was fully awake. See, the lantern came first, Garrick's big square one that he carried on his property inspections, bright enough to throw shadows hard across the walls. See, then his voice, which he never bothered to lower because he believed that volume was a form of authority. See, get up. Mara was already sitting up. The stranger was still against the far wall, awake now too, watching from under the blanket with those gray eyes that showed nothing. See, Mr. Voss, you used water from the ration barrels. He didn't come close. See, he didn't need to. Garrick Voss conducted most confrontations from a distance, which gave him space to perform without risk. See, you brought someone onto my property without permission. See, you used my supplies on a stranger without authorization. See, he was hurt. Mara's voice was steady. She worked to keep it there. See, he would have, I don't care what he would have done. Garrick's voice dropped in a way that was more frightening than the volume. See, quiet was where his real authority lived. That water is counted. See, everything on this ranch is counted. When you take from my count, you steal from me. See, and I do not keep thieves. The stranger started to speak. See, something shifted on his face, a decision forming. See, Mara got there first. This isn't his fault. He was unconscious when I found him. See, this was my choice. Garrick looked at the man against the wall. See, something crossed his face, brief recognition, or something close to it, or something that might have been unease quickly controlled, and then it was gone. See, I don't care whose fault it is. Both of you are off this property by morning. He looked at Mara. See, you're done. Pack what you came with and be gone by light. See, he left the way he'd come, the lantern swinging shadows back and forth until the door closed behind him. See, Mara sat on the edge of her cot in the near dark and pressed her hands flat against her knees. See, 14 months, her only address, the closest thing to steady ground she had. See, she looked at the corner where the stranger had been. See, he was gone. The blanket was folded neatly on the floor where he'd been lying. See, that was all. She sat with that for a long moment. See, the cold in the shed felt different without another person breathing in it. See, bigger. Then she picked up her canvas bag and started packing. See, by the time pale light came through the shed's single high window, Mara had everything that was hers in that bag. See, it wasn't heavy. That was the other truth about 14 months at Iron Hollow. She'd arrived with almost nothing, and she'd managed to save almost nothing, because 60 cents on the dollar didn't stretch as far as desperation hoped. See, she had her clothes. She had her grandfather's silver keepsake. See, she had $8 and some change from her last 2 weeks' wages, which Garrick had already decided she wasn't getting back for the unauthorized water. See, she stepped through the gate into the cold morning. See, Calder Roos was leaning against the fence post, picking something from his teeth with the end of a match. See, he watched her come through with the specific kind of enjoyment that small men have when someone larger than them falls. See, long walk to Ashford Crossing, he said. She didn't answer him. See, no horse, no canteen, no food, he tilted his head. See, you should have thought about that before you decided to play nursemaid to some drifter who didn't even stick around to say goodbye. See, she kept walking. Maybe he'll turn up in Ashford, Calder called after her, grinning now. See, you can ask him if it was worth it. The gate closed behind her. See, she walked. The land between Iron Hollow and Ashford Crossing was flat and wide, and currently offering nothing in the way of kindness scrub brush, cracked earth, the occasional stand of dry grass that rattled in the wind like old paper. See, the cold had a bite to it that deepened when the sun got higher, which was a particular cruelty of the high desert in early spring. See, it looked like morning. It felt like the inside of a stone building. See, Mara set her jaw and walked. She was 3 miles out when she heard the horses. See, she didn't turn around immediately. You learned, in places like Cinderwash, that turning around quickly was a kind of invitation. See, she kept her pace and let the sound tell her what it was: 2 horses, coming fast, not ranch pace, but running pace. See, she turned. Calder and another ranch hand, a blocky man named Denny, whose main qualification seemed to be his willingness to do what Calder said, were pulling up hard 30 yards behind her, their horses raising a curtain of pale dust. See, Calder dropped from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped. See, he was still wearing the same grin, but his eyes were working in a way that had nothing to do with humor. See, Garrick remembered something, Calder said, about some money that went missing from the tack room. See, I didn't take any money. Garrick remembers it differently. See, Garrick's wrong. Calder stepped forward. See, Denny stayed on his horse but moved it slightly to her left, and Mara registered the geometry of it the way Elias had taught her to register geometry, who was where, what the angles were, what moved fastest. See, give us the bag, Calder said. We'll search it. If there's no money, we'll tell Garrick. See, she knew what was in the bag. She knew what they were actually after. See, the keepsake, she'd seen Calder looking at it twice before, the way he looked at anything that might convert to cash. See, no, she said. The grin dropped. What happened next happened in the span of maybe 4 seconds. See, his hand came out and caught her by the forearm, and she pulled back hard enough to wrench free, but not hard enough to stay on her feet. And the bag went into the dirt along with most of what was in it when the clasp gave way. Clothes. See, her extra boots, the $8 scattering across the road, and the keepsake rolling free in its cloth wrapping. See, she was on her knees reaching for it when his boot came down, not on her hand, but close enough that she could feel the wind from it. See, then a rifle shot cracked across the valley, not close. See, not aimed at anything visible, but sharp and deliberate, the way a shot sounds when it's placed there on purpose. See, Calder's boot stopped moving, the horses shied back. See, Denny cursed and fought his mount, and in the sudden complicated silence that followed the echo of the rifle, Mara looked up. See, 6 riders on the road ahead. They'd come from nowhere visible or from the side trail that cut through the dry creek bed, which she'd been too occupied to watch. See, they were moving at a controlled walk now, disciplined and unhurried, spreading into a loose line across the road. The armed men. Well mounted, no ranch colors, she recognized. See, at the center, moving slightly ahead of the others, was a rider in a black coat. See, she knew the build, the way he sat in the saddle with one hand relaxed on the reins, and one that had briefly held a rifle, now resting at his side. See, she knew the gray eyes. Rowan, but not the Rowan she'd left in the equipment shed. See, not the hollow-cheeked, blood-streaked, barely conscious man she'd pulled water for in the dark. See, this man sat his horse like someone who had been born to be watched. See, and when he looked at Calder Rusk took a step backward. See, Mara was still on her knees in the road with her grandfather's keepsake in her hand and her belongings scattered around her, and she was thinking, with the strange clarity that shock sometimes provides. He said I hadn't lost my future. See, she hadn't fully believed him. She was beginning to reconsider. See, Calder Rusk was not a man who frightened easily. That was the problem with men like him. They'd spent so long being the most dangerous thing in any given situation that they'd forgotten what it felt like to be outranked. See, he stood in the road with his hand still half raised from where he'd nearly brought his boot down on Mara's hand, and he was doing the math. See, 6 riders. Armed. The man at the center in the black coat, who was looking at him with the kind of patience that wasn't patience at all, but something colder, the willingness to wait because the outcome was already decided. See, Calder did the math and didn't like the answer. This is private ranch business, he said. See, his voice came out steadier than Mara expected. She'd give him that. See, Rowan didn't answer immediately. He swung down from the horse with none of the stiffness she would have expected from a man who'd had 2 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder 12 hours earlier. See, either he healed fast or he was running on something that overrode the pain. See, he handed his reins to the rider beside him without looking and walked forward until he was maybe 10 feet from Calder, and then he stopped. See, pick up her things, he said. Quiet. Completely quiet. See, the kind of voice that didn't need volume because it had never needed to earn anything through noise. See, Calder's jaw tightened. I don't know who you think you. See, pick them up. Something in the way Rowan said it the second time was different from the first. See, not louder. Just final, the way a door closing is final. See, Calder looked at the 6 mounted men behind Rowan. See, he looked at Denny, who had suddenly found his horse's neck very interesting. See, he looked at Mara on the ground, who was already gathering what she could reach. See, then he bent down and picked up her wool shirt from the road and held it out to her like it had personally offended him. See, Mara took it. She didn't say thank you. She didn't think he deserved it. See, she got to her feet and found Rowan standing closer than she'd realized, close enough to speak low. See, are you hurt? He said. No, a beat. My bag clasp broke. See, he glanced at the bag. Then he looked at her face in the way someone looks when they're checking for the thing you're not saying. See, she held his gaze steady, and he seemed to accept that, turning back to Calder. See your name, Rowan said. Calder Rusk, foreman of Iron Hollow Ranch, and you're standing on land that. See, we're standing on a public road, Mr. Rusk. Rowan let that sit for a moment. See, you just assaulted a woman and scattered her possessions across it. See, I watched you do it. My men watched you do it. He paused. See, would you like to tell me again whose business this is? See, Calder's face had gone through several colors in quick succession and was currently arriving at something between red and white that didn't look healthy. See, she stole from the ranch. She didn't, Rowan said. See, but we're going to have a longer conversation about theft in Cinderwash. See, just not with you, and not here. He looked at Denny, still mounted and clearly considering his options. See, both of you go back to the ranch. Tell Garrick Voss that Rowan Mercer wants a meeting. See, today. The name landed differently than Mara expected. See, she'd thought it might confuse Calder, or that he'd push back. See, instead, something happened to his face that was closer to recognition. See, his eyes moved from Rowan to the men behind him and back to Rowan, and whatever calculation he'd been running before, he ran it again with new numbers. See, he didn't say anything else. He got back on his horse. See, Denny was already turned around. They rode back toward Iron Hollow at a pace that was just short of a retreat. See, Mara watched them go. Then she looked at Rowan. Rowan Mercer, she said. See, yes, that name meant something to him. It tends to. See, she waited. He didn't expand on it immediately, which was already becoming something she recognized about him. He didn't fill silence just to fill it. See, he looked at the road where her things had been scattered, then at the bag in her hands with the broken clasp. See, one of my men has a saddlebag with some cord in it, he said. See, we can tie the bag closed. I don't need, she stopped herself. See, the bag was broken. She did need it. Thank you. He turned to the rider on his right, a lean older man with a gray beard, and said something quiet. See, the man produced a length of cord from his saddlebag and brought it over. See, Rowan took it and held it out to Mara. She took it from him and worked the cord through the bag's broken clasp hardware, tying it in a knot that would hold. See, it wasn't neat. It would do. You left, she said, working the cord. See, this morning. Before I woke up. I had things that needed doing before daylight. See, like changing your clothes. He almost smiled. Among other things. See, she pulled the knot tight and looked up at him. In the daylight, with the black coat and the 6 riders and the stillness of authority around him, it was harder to line him up with the blood-streaked man she'd found at the well. See, but the eyes were the same. The way he looked at her was the same direct, measuring, not unkind. See, who are you, she said. And I mean actually. He glanced at the riders, who had moved their horses a polite distance away. See, then he looked back at her, and whatever composed expression he'd been wearing shifted slightly, like something adjusting underneath it. See, Rowan Mercer, he said again. Mercer Continental Rail and Cattle. See, I hold land contracts in 11 Western territories, and I run livestock operations on 4 of them. A pause. See, the operation in this valley has been losing cattle for the better part of 8 months. See, Mara worked through that, and you came here yourself. See, dressed like that. When money goes missing at scale, there are 2 options. See, send investigators who announce themselves by existing and give the people responsible time to cover their tracks. See, or go yourself quietly and see what's actually happening. He looked toward Iron Hollow off in the distance. See, I'd been in the valley 3 days when Garrick's men found me in the canyon. See, the canyon. Something clicked into place. The Dry Creek Canyon. See, east of the ranch. You know it, I've ridden it. See, there's a box end that Garrick keeps locked. She paused. See, I always thought it was old equipment storage. Something moved in his expression. See, it's not old equipment storage. She let that land. See, 12 hours ago, she'd been sleeping in a shed and figuring her biggest problem was an 8-mile walk in the cold. See, the architecture of the larger situation was assembling itself around her, piece by piece, and it was considerably more complicated than she'd been prepared for. See, Garrick's been rustling cattle, she said. It wasn't a question. See, from my herds and at least 2 neighboring operations. See, using the canyon as a staging area before moving them south to traders who don't ask about brands. Rowan's voice was flat and factual, the way a man talks when the anger underneath has been compressed into something that runs cold rather than hot. See, my men spent the night confirming what I'd found before Garrick's people interrupted my investigation. See, confirming it how? Counts. Brands. The paperwork trail that a man like Garrick keeps thinking he's clever enough to hide and isn't. He looked at her. See, he's not a careful man. He's a bold one. There's a difference. See, bold men leave evidence because they believe they won't get caught. See, Mara was quiet for a moment. The wind pushed a ribbon of dust across the road between them. See, so what happens now? Now, Rowan said, I go have a conversation with Garrick Voss about the nature of his debts. See, he owes you money too. He owes Mercer Continental considerably more than he can pay. See, the cattle thefts are the piece he didn't think we'd connect to the debt. See, he was wrong about that. He paused. I'd like you to come. See, she looked at him steadily. Why? Because you work at that ranch. See, worked, he corrected. You know the hands. You know the property. See, and because he stopped. Because what? He seemed to decide something. See, because there's something I need to tell you that I couldn't tell you last night. See, and I'd rather tell you somewhere that isn't a road. See, they rode toward Iron Hollow, Mara on a borrowed horse, that the gray-bearded rider whose name turned out to be Fletcher had produced without being asked, adjusting the stirrups without comment. See, she'd ridden enough to hold herself without embarrassing anyone, though she was no natural at it the way some people were. See, she rode alongside Rowan, slightly behind, watching the back of his shoulders and thinking. See, she was thinking about the locked end of the canyon. See, she was thinking about the water barrel and the $8 scattered across the road and Calder's boot in the air above her hand. See, she was thinking about what it meant that the man she'd given water to in the dark turned out to be the man who controlled the financial fate of the ranch that had fired her for doing it. See, she was also thinking that she was 18 years old, owned a canvas bag with a broken clasp, and had somehow ended up riding toward a confrontation with Garrick Voss, alongside 6 armed riders and the wealthiest land investor she'd ever heard of. See, Esaias, she thought, would have found this funny, and then quickly would have reminded her not to get too comfortable. See, you said there was something to tell me, she said, when the silence had run long enough. See, Rowan kept his eyes on the road ahead. His shoulders were set in a way that she was starting to read not tension exactly, but the posture of a man organizing words before he released them. See, my father's name was Samuel Mercer, he said. He spent most of his life in the Eastern Territories, building what eventually became the rail side of the company. See, in his younger years, before the money, he moved freight by wagon through some country that was not particularly friendly to freight wagons. See, he paused. Mara waited. In the spring of it would have been about 30 years ago now, his wagon train was hit by a raiding party in the hill country south of the Red Fork River. See, it was bad. Several men were killed outright. See, the survivors were in rough shape, and the situation was the kind that most passing travelers would have assessed quickly and then given wide berth to Because associating yourself with the aftermath of a raid was dangerous. See, it drew attention. It created obligation. He glanced at her briefly. See, one man stopped. He was traveling alone, which already made no sense in that country. See, he stopped, and he spent 2 days helping the survivors treating injuries, moving the wounded men to a safer location, going back to his own supplies when their own ran out. Another pause. See, my father was one of the men he treated. My father would have died without him. See, he's certain of that. Mara's hands tightened on the reins without meaning to. See, the man's name, Rowan said, was Elias Ellison. See, the world did something strange for a moment, not stopped rearranged. See, the distances shifted. The sound of the horse's hooves on the dry road seemed to come from slightly farther away. See, my grandfather, she said. Yes, he was watching her now, not the road. See, my father spent years trying to find him. By the time he had the resources to search properly, Elias had moved twice, and the records were incomplete. See, my father died 4 years ago, knowing he'd never repaid the man who kept him alive. He kept his voice even, but she could hear something working underneath it. See, he made me promise to find the family, whatever it took. See, Mara stared at the road between her horse's ears. I found Elias's claim records, Rowan continued. See, then the death record, then you working at a ranch in Cinderwash for 60 cents on the dollar. Something shifted in his jaw. See, I was already coming to this valley for the cattle investigation. See, finding you here, it wasn't coincidence, but it also wasn't the plan. See, I hadn't decided yet how to approach you. I didn't want to arrive with money and a story and have it feel like a transaction. See, so you arrived beaten half to death instead, Mara said. See, that was less planned. She heard herself make a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. See, her eyes were burning in a way she didn't want to acknowledge. See, he never told me that story. My grandfather, he talked about the road, about traveling, about the people he met. See, he never, she stopped. He wouldn't have thought it was remarkable. See, that's the thing. He would have told you it was the only thing to do. See, I know, Rowan said quietly. That's the thing about people like him. See, she pressed her lips together and looked at the horizon and let the wind do what it wanted with her face for a minute. See, she was not going to cry on a borrowed horse in front of 6 armed strangers and a man she'd met 12 hours ago. See, she made that decision clearly and held to it. What did you intend? She said. See, her voice came out steadier than it had any right to. See, before Garrick found you in the canyon, what were you going to do? See, find you, tell you the story, offer you whatever you needed, money, property, a position with the company. He paused. See, I've learned since then that you don't respond particularly well to being offered things. See, she looked at him. You've known me for 12 hours. See, you gave water to a hurt man you'd never seen before, knowing it would cost you your job, and when I told you that I owed you, you said that saving me was an act of conscience, and you wanted work, not charity. He held her gaze. See, 12 hours is sometimes enough. She didn't have an answer for that immediately. See, Fletcher called from behind them, something about the gate being visible now, and Rowan turned forward. See, the ranch entrance was ahead, the wooden arch with Iron Hollow branded into the crossbeam, and, beyond it, the yard where everything looked exactly the same as it had 4 hours ago when she'd walked out of it. See, Mara looked at the arch and felt something complicated move through her. See, not triumph, too early for that, and she'd learned to distrust anything that felt like triumph before the situation resolved. See, more like the vertigo of seeing the same place from a completely different altitude. See, she'd left through that gate with $8 and a broken bag. See, she was coming back with things she didn't yet have words for. See, Garrick was waiting in the yard. She'd expected that. See, Calder had ridden hard, and Garrick was not a man who let situations develop around him if he could get ahead of them. See, he was standing on the porch of the main house with his arms crossed and his best foreman's in-charge posture. See, the one she'd seen him use on supply merchants and bank representatives and anyone he was trying to establish dominance over before a conversation started. See, he saw the riders. He saw Rowan in the black coat. See, and then he saw Mara, and something went wrong in his face for just a fraction of a second before he controlled it. See, Calder was positioned to his left, behind and slightly below, which told her everything about how that conversation had gone. Calder had delivered the message and then retreated into the secondary position, which meant the name had rattled him more than he'd shown on the road. Rowan dismounted in the yard and handed his reins to Fletcher without breaking stride. He walked toward the porch, with Mara beside him, and the 6 riders spread in positions that were casual in the way that trained arrangements are casual, covering the angles without announcing it. Garrick unfolded his arms and came down 2 porch steps. A power move. You don't let the other party come all the way to you when you can control the meeting point. Mara recognized it and suspected Rowan did too. Mercer, Garrick said. The name cost him something to say. She could hear it. This is a surprise. It shouldn't be, Rowan said. I sent word 8 weeks ago about the discrepancy in the cattle counts. Your representative told my office the numbers were a clerical error and the matter was resolved. And I believe the matter is not resolved. Rowan's voice didn't change pitch or volume. It just acquired a quality that made interruption feel structurally impossible. In the past 8 months, 214 head bearing Mercer Continental brands have disappeared from the southern grazing range. We have located 86 of them in the canyon on the eastern edge of this property, in holding pens built with iron hollow lumber, behind a lock purchased from the Ashford Crossing hardware account registered to this ranch. The yard had gone very quiet. The ranch hands who'd been moving through their morning tasks had stopped, not ostentatiously, just stilled. The way people still when they understand that something significant is happening close to them and they're not sure yet which way it's going to break. Garrick's expression had locked into something that was technically neutral but structurally defensive. Those are serious accusations. They're documented facts. Rowan reached into his coat and produced a folded document, holding it loosely. Along with the records from your creditor accounts, which show that Iron Hollow Ranch has defaulted on 3 payment obligations to Mercer Continental in the past 18 months and currently owes the company $47,000 against a property valuation of. He glanced at the document. $39,000. Mara watched Garrick's throat move. What this means, Rowan continued, is that you cannot pay your debts, and that you have been attempting to address that shortfall by stealing from the company you owe the money to. He folded the document and put it back in his coat. This morning, I completed the purchase of the outstanding debt obligations and exercised the foreclosure provision on this property. The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear the wind moving through the fence posts. Garrick stared at him. Something was happening behind his eyes that she'd never seen there before, a crumbling, contained, and fighting itself, but real. You can't. The paperwork was filed in Ashford Crossing at 7 this morning, Rowan said. I own Iron Hollow Ranch, Mr. Voss. I have since approximately 7:15. Garrick looked at Mara. She didn't look away. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of looking away. You, he said. The word came out like something he'd bitten down on. I just rode in with him, she said. I was walking to Ashford Crossing when you'll recall your foreman scattered my things across the road. Don't. His voice cracked on the word and he rebuilt it fast. Don't stand there like you're... I'm standing here, she said quietly, because I was invited. By the man who owns this ranch. Garrick looked at Rowan again. The crumbling was more visible now, and he was angry at himself for letting it show, which made him angrier. So what? You're here to collect your property. Take it. I'm here to resolve the situation correctly, Rowan said. The criminal matter, the rustling operation that goes to the sheriff in Ashford Crossing. My men have already delivered the initial report and evidence this morning. You and Mr. Rusk will need to be available for those conversations. He paused. What I'm here to settle today is what happens to the ranch. He turned then and looked at Mara, and the shift in his attention from Garrick to her was so deliberate and complete that it changed the weight of the yard. I won't be operating it, Rowan said. I have no interest in running a single cattle ranch when what I own is a rail and land company. Iron Hollow needs someone who knows this land and these animals and the people who work here. He held Mara's gaze. Someone who already has. She heard one of the ranch hands exhale somewhere behind her. See, she heard Calder say something under his breath that she didn't catch. See, she looked at Rowan and felt the vertigo again, sharper now, with an edge to it that wasn't entirely comfortable because the thing he was gesturing at was enormous, and she was 18 and owned a canvas bag. See, and enormous things offered to people with canvas bags tended to come with conditions that revealed themselves later. See, what exactly are you proposing? She said carefully. See, an operating arrangement. Mercer Continental provides startup capital to rebuild the operation, properly stock replacement, water infrastructure repair, fair wages for the hands who stay. See, you run the ranch. Revenue is split, with a portion going to debt retirement, and at the end of 5 years, if the operation is solvent, the property transfers to your ownership outright. See, he said it the way he said most things, no performance, just the fact of it, laid down like something that had been thought about carefully and was now being offered complete. See, you would answer to no one. Make your own decisions about how this place is managed. See, Mara let the silence run. Not because she was performing deliberation, but because she genuinely needed a moment where the size of what he was saying could exist alongside everything else she was holding. See, Garrick made a sound that was probably meant to be a laugh. See, she's 18 years old. She's a ranch hand. She's the most capable person I've seen operate on this property, Rowan said, without looking at him. See, and I've met you. One of the riders made a sound that might have been a cough. See, Garrick's face darkened. This is over, Rowan said. See, Mr. Voss, this conversation between us is over. What happens next involves the sheriff's office and lawyers and a process that will take some months. See, you are welcome to be here for the announcement to the workers, or you can go inside. See, either way, that porch is no longer yours. Garrick stood there for a moment that stretched badly. See, Mara watched him go through something internal that she suspected was the collision between who he'd always believed he was and what the morning had made visible about who he actually was. See, it was not a pleasant thing to watch. See, it also wasn't a pleasant thing to feel, which was the part she hadn't expected, some thin wire of something in her chest that wasn't satisfaction at all, just the bare complicated fact of watching a man lose what he'd built by being who he was. See, then Garrick Voss walked back up the porch steps and through the door, and the door closed behind him, and the yard let out a breath it had been holding for probably several years. See, Calder looked at the door, then at Rowan, then at Mara. See, his face was doing something she recognized, the math running again, faster now, with different variables. See, he was calculating whether there was a way to reposition himself in this new arrangement, whether contrition was an option, whether the morning could be negotiated. See, Mr. Rusk, Rowan said, without looking at him. The sheriff's office will want to speak with you about this morning's events on the road, in addition to the investigation. See, I'd recommend being available. Calder went still. See, then he walked away toward the bunkhouse, with the careful gait of a man who knows he's being watched and is trying very hard to look like he doesn't know it. See, Rowan turned to the yard, to the cluster of ranch hands who'd been accumulating at the edges of the confrontation. See, a dozen men, give or take. Some she knew well, Webb, who'd been at the ranch longer than anyone and did the work of 2 men without making noise about it. See, Danella's husband, Trace, who was quiet and steady and had once covered for Mara when she'd made a scheduling mistake that would have cost her the job before she'd found her footing. See, others she knew less but recognized the newer hands Garrick had brought on in the past few months, whose loyalties she wasn't sure of. See, they were all looking at her. At her. See, she hadn't expected that. She'd expected them to look at the money, at the authority, at the man in the black coat who'd just peeled Garrick Voss off his own porch like old paint. See, instead they were looking at the girl who'd walked out the gate 4 hours ago with a broken bag and $8, because they'd known her for 14 months, and apparently that had meant something she hadn't fully measured. See, Webb took his hat off. She didn't know why that hit her the way it did. See, something about the simplicity of it, the justness of the gesture. See, she looked at the yard, the buildings she knew, the fence lines she'd walked, the well that was nearly dry, and the barrels she'd rationed water from, and the equipment shed where she'd slept on a cot in the corner for over a year. See, I can't promise you anything today, she said. Her voice was steady. See, steadier than she felt. I don't know yet what this looks like. See, I don't know what the books say, or what the water situation actually is, or how many head are recoverable. She paused. See, what I can tell you is that nobody who works here honestly will be pushed out so I can bring in my own people. See, and anybody who wants to know what they're owed, I'll look you in the eye when I tell you. See, Webb put his hat back on. That's enough for me, he said. See, nobody moved toward the bunkhouse. Nobody walked away. See, they stood in the yard, some with their arms crossed, some with their hands in their pockets, some just watching her with the particular weight of people deciding whether to trust something new, and not one of them followed Garrick's road. See, Rowan said nothing. He stood slightly to her left and slightly behind, which she thought was deliberate, and which she filed away. See, she looked at the main house, at the closed door. Then she turned back to the yard and everything that needed doing in it, and she thought about her grandfather on the porch, watching the dust devil spin itself apart in the field. See, about the test not being what you did when it cost you nothing. See, she hadn't known yet, that evening, what it was actually going to cost her. See, she knew now, and she was still here. The first thing Mara did when the yard emptied was walk to the well. See, not to check the water level, she already knew that. See, she'd known the exact depth of that well for 3 months, tracking it the way you track something you're afraid of losing entirely. See, she walked to it because she needed somewhere to put her hands while her head caught up with the last 4 hours of her life, and the well was solid and real and didn't require anything from her. See, she set her palms on the stone rim and looked down into the dark. See, 14 months ago she'd arrived at this well with a forged letter and blistered boots and asked for work. See, now she was what, exactly? The word that Rowan had used was operator. See, the word that the ranch hands' faces had used was something closer to ours. See, the word that the main house's closed door used was threat, and she knew Garrick was still in there, and she knew that closed doors didn't stay closed. See, Fletcher appeared at her elbow. He had a quiet way of moving for a man his size, and she'd already noted that he didn't speak unless he had something to say, which put him several rungs above most of the men she'd worked alongside. See, Mr. Mercer asks if you'd like to look at the account books before the afternoon, Fletcher said. See, he has copies. The originals are being held by the lawyers in Ashford Crossing. See, where is he? Main house. She looked at the closed door. See, Garrick's still in there. Mr. Mercer went in 20 minutes ago, Fletcher said. See, Garrick Voss is no longer in the main house. She blinked. See, when did he leave? Back door. About 10 minutes after you were at the well the first time. Fletcher's expression was neutral in the practiced way of someone who'd seen a great many things and had opinions about none of them professionally. See, he took a horse from the stable, the bay. Fletcher, the other Fletcher, from town is tracking which direction he went. See, you have 2 Fletchers. The other one goes by his last name. See, distinction matters in a company our size. He paused. See, Mr. Mercer also says there's no obligation today. See, if you want time before you look at anything, that's available to you. See, she thought about that. Time. What would she do with time right now? Sit in the equipment shed and think about the enormity of what the morning had handed her. Stand at the well and panic quietly while the afternoon got away from her. See, tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes, she said. See, the inside of Iron Hollow's main house was something Mara had seen exactly twice in 14 months. See, once when she'd been sent to deliver a message to Garrick's wife, who'd left for the city 3 months into Mara's tenure and hadn't come back. See, once when Garrick had called her inside specifically to fire the hand before her, which she understood in retrospect had been a performance establishing the consequence for anyone watching. See, the house smelled like old tobacco and something stale underneath it, the particular smell of a space that had been occupied by someone who stopped caring about it. See, the front room was large enough to have been comfortable and wasn't, because Garrick had furnished it with pieces that communicated value rather than use heavy chairs that looked expensive and sat badly, a table too big for the room. See, lamps positioned for impression rather than light. See, Rowan was at the table with 3 ledger books open in front of him. See, he'd taken off the black coat, which was the first time she'd seen him without it since the road. And without it, he looked younger and also more tired, The kind of tired that sits behind the eyes and doesn't go away when you sleep. See, his shirt had the particular rumple of someone who'd changed in a hurry, and she remembered that 12 hours ago he'd been lying against the wall of the equipment shed with 2 cracked ribs, and she thought, not for the first time, that there was something not quite ordinary about the way he operated. He looked up when she came in. Sit down. She sat across from him. The chair was exactly as bad as it looked. He turned one of the ledgers toward her. The operation is in worse shape than the debt numbers suggest. Garrick was maintaining the appearance of profitability on paper by delaying payments on everything he could feed, veterinary accounts, wages to some of the newer hands. He tapped a column. 4 men haven't been paid in 6 weeks. They stayed because leaving meant the road with no wages at all. Mara looked at the column. She recognized 2 of the names quiet men who'd been doing their work without complaint, which she'd read as loyalty and now understood might have been desperation. The feeling that landed in her chest about that was sharp and had a specific target, but Garrick was gone out the back door and the feeling had nowhere useful to go. What's the actual water situation, she said. The main well is at 30% of operational capacity. There are 2 secondary wells on the east pasture. One is functional. One collapsed in on itself sometime in the last 6 months and hasn't been repaired. He watched her face as she processed this. The water infrastructure is the most urgent problem. Everything else is recoverable on a slower timeline. The water situation affects the herd, the staff, and the land simultaneously. I know someone in Ashford Crossing who does well work, Mara said. Honest man. Fair rates. Garrick wouldn't use him because he thought he was overpriced, and because I think he just didn't like the man, personally. Garrick had a way of making business decisions based on who annoyed him. Make a note of his name. She looked up from the ledger. You're writing things down that I say. I'm tracking what needs doing. She stopped. Reorganized. I'm not used to that. To what I say being written down by someone. He held her gaze for a moment. Something in his expression acknowledged what she'd said without making a performance of acknowledging it. Get used to it, he said, not unkindly, just matter of fact. She looked back at the ledger. The 4 men who aren't paid that gets fixed today. Not at the end of the week, today. Agreed. And the wages going forward for everyone. I want to know what the actual number is. Not what Garrick was paying, what the work is worth. She paused. I was paid 60 cents on the dollar of what the men earned. I'd like that corrected as a baseline principle going forward. Rowan was quiet for a moment. I should tell you that the previous foreman's rate was. I'm not the foreman, Mara said, and I'm not asking about the previous rate. I'm telling you what the principle is. Another moment of quiet. He wrote something. She didn't look at what. The herd counts, she said. The cattle Garrick was holding in the canyon, how many are yours, and how many belong to the neighboring operations? We're still sorting that. The brands are mixed. Some have been altered, which takes longer to verify. He paused. The neighboring ranchers Aldous Cray and the Penitent Creek operation, they'll need to be contacted directly. The relationship between Iron Hollow and those ranches has been adversarial because Garrick made it adversarial. That's another thing that will need work. I know Aldous Cray, Mara said. Not well, but I've seen him at the supply runs. He's not unreasonable. He's been angry, but angry and unreasonable aren't the same thing. No, Rowan said. They're not. She sat with the ledger in front of her and turned pages without really reading them, just putting her hands on the texture of the problem numbers and columns, and the handwriting that was Garrick's. Cramped and controlled, and in some places visibly altered, correction marks that tried to look like they'd always been there. He didn't want anyone to find this, she said. No. He was confident enough to steal from you and keep the records in his own house. Bold men, Rowan said, using the phrase he'd used on the road. They stop believing the evidence matters because they believe they won't get caught. It's the same thinking pattern in every case. The scale changes. The structure doesn't. She looked up from the ledger. How many cases have you worked through? More than I expected when I started. Is this, she chose the words, is this what you do? Come into failing operations and take them apart. See, sometimes taking apart is the right answer. Sometimes rebuilding is. He considered her. See, I don't have a preference between them. I have a preference for the outcome being correct. See, and what's the correct outcome here? He was quiet for a moment that felt deliberate. See, I think you already know what it is. You told me this morning on the road. See, you want work, not charity. You know this land. He closed the ledger in front of him. See, the correct outcome is that Iron Hollow becomes what it should have been before Garrick Voss got his hands on it. See, an honest operation that treats the land and the people working it like they're both worth something. See, that's not a complicated idea, Mara said. Most important ideas aren't. See, she almost said something, stopped herself, then said it anyway. See, why does it keep being so hard then, if the idea is simple? See, he looked at her for a moment with something that wasn't quite a smile. See, because simple ideas are expensive to execute. They cost the person who runs them something every single day. See, you can't have an honest operation and take a shortcut on wages when the money's tight. See, you can't treat the land like it's worth something and then drill it dry when you need quick returns. See, every time the simple idea runs up against a hard month, somebody in charge has to pay the price of choosing it again. He paused. See, Garrick didn't want to pay that price. He wanted the reputation of an honest man and the freedom of a dishonest one. See, it doesn't work that way. Mara looked at the ledger. See, at the corrected columns. At the evidence of a man who'd wanted both things simultaneously and had handled the contradiction by stealing from the person he owed. See, I'm not him, she said. Not defensively. Just placing it on the table. See, I know, Rowan said. The afternoon was when the real work started, and the real work was not romantic in any of the ways that mornings of revelation sometimes promised. See, Webb found her behind the equipment shed, going through the tool inventory. Garrick had a habit of calling things lost that had actually been lent out and not tracked. See, and she wanted to know what they actually had before any estimates could be made, and told her that 2 of the newer hands were asking whether they should be looking for other work. See, which 2, she said. Portis and the young one, Decker. See, she didn't know Portis well. Decker she knew slightly 17, maybe 18, had the look of someone who'd gotten the job through necessity and not because he'd always dreamed of cattle work. See, she set down the tool she was holding. Where are they? See, bunkhouse. She went to the bunkhouse. Portis was sitting on his cot, cleaning a piece of tack with the focused attention of someone who doesn't know what else to do with their hands. See, Decker was standing near the window, which was telling you stand near exits when you're weighing whether to use them. See, you're thinking about leaving, she said. Portis looked up. See, we didn't sign on with you. We signed on with Garrick. See, Garrick's gone. Seems like a natural point to reassess. See, that's fair, she said. What would make you stay? See, he blinked, like he'd prepared for negotiation and gotten something that wasn't it. See, what would make you stay? Tell me, and I'll tell you whether I can do it. See, Portis was quiet for a moment, recalibrating. Wages paid on time. See, week by week, not when it's convenient for the boss. See, done. Retroactively for the 6 weeks you're owed. See, another recalibration, his jaw moved. Fair warning before any major changes. See, not told what's happening and asked what we think before it's decided. See, she considered that. It was not a small ask. Asking someone in charge to consult before deciding was asking them to slow down and accept the risk of being talked out of something. See, she understood exactly what it was because it was also what she'd wanted from Garrick and never gotten. See, I can do that, she said. Not on every decision, some things have to move fast. See, but on anything that changes how the operation works, yes. See, Portis looked at Decker. Decker had turned from the window. See, the water ration, Decker said. His voice was younger than his face. See, Garrick had us on less than what's healthy for working men in this heat. See, we were drinking less than the horses in the afternoon. See, something moved cold through Mara's chest. She hadn't known that. See, the ration changes today. Full working allotment, same as the animals. See, Decker looked at his hands. Then at her, he nodded. See, Portis set down the tack. I'll stay. Decker didn't say it. See, he just moved away from the window, which was enough. See, She left the bunkhouse and stood in the yard for a moment with the afternoon sun doing what afternoon sun did in Cinderwash, which was press down on everything with the particular authority of heat that had nowhere to go. See, she thought about Decker and the water ration. She thought about 4 men unpaid for 6 weeks. See, she thought about all the ways a place could be cruel without the cruelty being visible unless you were on the receiving end of it. See, she went back to the tool inventory and wrote down what they were short. See, Rowan left Iron Hollow that evening. See, not for good, he was clear about that. See, he had business in Ashford Crossing that the morning's events had accelerated, lawyers to meet, and documents to file, and the initial report to the sheriff's office that needed his presence to carry the weight it needed. See, he'd be back within the week. Fletcher would stay, along with 2 of the other riders, available for whatever was needed. See, she walked him to his horse at the gate. It felt like the appropriate thing to do, although she was aware that appropriate was a strange concept to be navigating at the end of a day like this one. See, the canyon pens, she said, when will those be cleared? See, tomorrow, if the sheriff moves quickly, the day after at the latest. He checked his saddle's girth strap with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. See, the recovered cattle will be sorted on site. Anything with a verified Mercer brand comes back to your herd count. See, the neighboring rancher's animals get returned directly. See, I want to be there when that happens. He looked at her. See, why? Because Aldous Cray is going to be there, and because the first conversation between Iron Hollow and Penitent Creek under new management matters more than most things that'll happen this month. See, I want it to come from me in person, not from a representative. See, he was quiet for a moment. That's good instinct. See, it's also just right, she said. He lost cattle. See, he should hear an actual apology from someone standing in front of him, not a letter from a lawyer. See, Rowan mounted. The horse shifted once beneath him, and he steadied it without fuss. See, in the low evening light, he looked like he'd been assembled for exactly this kind of moment, the right horse, the right coat, the right bearing, and Mara was aware again of the gap between who he was and the man she'd found at the well. See, and aware also that the gap wasn't as wide as it appeared. See, the man at the well had been real. This was also real. See, people contained more than one version of themselves, and the version that showed depended almost entirely on what the situation required. See, I'll send word when the canyon clearance is scheduled, he said. See, thank you. She paused. For today, all of it. See, he looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that wasn't quite neutral and wasn't quite open, the one that acknowledged something without making a ceremony of acknowledging it. See, you did the difficult thing last night, he said. See, everything that happened today is downstream of that. See, she nodded. He rode through the gate and down the road toward Ashford Crossing, and Fletcher pulled the gate closed behind him, and Mara stood in the yard and listened to the hoofbeats thin out into the distance. See, Webb appeared at her shoulder. He had a talent for that materializing in the correct place at the correct moment, which was the kind of quality that made a man invaluable and which Garrick had presumably spent years failing to appreciate. See, cook needs to know the head count for supper, he said. See, and whether we're still on ration. Full water allotment from now, she said. See, head count, she thought. Tell him 14, including the 3 men who came in with Mercer. See, yes, ma'am. She almost corrected the ma'am. Then she let it stand. See, it wasn't subservience. It was just language, and it meant something different in Webb's register than it would have in Garrick's. See, Webb, she said. He stopped. The cook, she searched for the right way to ask. See, is he staying? He's been here longer than me. I don't want to assume. See, Webb's expression did something subtle that might have been approval. See, I'll ask him. Don't make it a test, she said. Just ask him like it's a question. See, that night, lying on the same cot in the same equipment shed, because the main house still felt like Garrick's space, and she wasn't ready to claim it yet, she ran numbers in her head until her eyes gave out. See, water infrastructure first. The collapsed secondary well would need to be assessed before it could be repaired. You didn't just dig wells. You understood why the previous one had failed. See, which meant bringing someone who could read soil and water tables and tell you whether the investment was sound. See, the man in Ashford Crossing she'd mentioned to Rowan, whose name was Carl Dern, had that capacity. See, she'd watched him work once on a neighboring claim, and he'd talked about the land the way some people talked about things they genuinely understood rather than things they'd been taught. See, the herd count mattered more than anything once the water was stabilized. See, you couldn't plan a recovery on uncertain numbers. See, she'd need to ride the grazing ranges herself, not because she didn't trust the hands to count accurately, but because she needed to understand the land as she was inheriting it, not as Garrick had described it. See, map slide, description slide. Your own 2 eyes and however many miles of riding were the only reliable survey. See, she was thinking about the eastern fence line. There'd been a section Garrick kept putting off repairing, claiming it wasn't priority, and she'd always suspected the neglect was deliberate. See, creating a soft boundary that made it easier to move cattle quietly when she heard it. See, a horse, moving slow and deliberate in the dark outside. See, not the sound of an animal that had gotten loose. The rhythm was wrong for that. See, this was directed movement. Someone in the saddle. See, she was out of the cot before she'd consciously decided to move, pulling her boots on in the dark, reaching for the lantern but not lighting it. See, she went to the shed door and opened it a crack. The yard was dark enough that shapes were mostly suggestion. See, the main house was dark. The bunkhouse had one window with a low light still in it, probably Portis, who she'd pegged as a late-night reader from the worn book she'd seen on his cot. See, the horse was near the stable, one figure dismounting. See, moving like they were trying not to be noticed, which was always a tell people who had a right to be somewhere moved without considering whether they were being watched. See, she opened the shed door wider and stepped out. "Who's there?" she said. See, not loud, not a question exactly. The figure stopped moving. See, she heard Fletcher's voice from the direction of the fence post where she'd noticed him positioned when she went to bed. See, "Hold where you are." Another voice, one of the other riders, somewhere she couldn't pinpoint. See, "Hands away from your body." The figure in the yard raised their hands slowly. See, the moonlight caught a face. Calder Rusk. He looked different from that morning. See, the performative quality was gone. He was in plain clothes now, not foreman's clothes, and he looked like a man who'd spent several hours arriving at a decision he wasn't sure about. See, Fletcher had a lantern now, and he moved into the yard with it. See, in the yellow light, Calder looked tired and older than the morning, and there was something in his posture that was unfamiliar, not defeated exactly, but something in that neighborhood. "See, I came back," Calder said. "I can see that," Mara said. "See, the sheriff came to find me this afternoon." He said it without inflection. "See, about the road this morning, and about the cattle operation." A pause. "See, I talked to them." She looked at him steadily. "What did you tell them?" "See, the truth." He said it like it cost him something. "See, most of it. A beat. All of it." Fletcher was watching her, waiting for a direction. See, she was aware of being assessed in this moment by Fletcher, by whoever else was watching from the bunkhouse window. See, this was the kind of moment that set patterns. What you did with it mattered. See, "Why did you come back here?" she said. "You could have gone to Ashford Crossing." See, gone south. "Because he stopped, reorganized." See, "Because I've got nowhere else to go, and because I was wrong this morning, and because some things need to be said to a person's face." See, he looked at her with the uncomfortable directness of someone making themselves do something they find genuinely difficult. See, "You were square with me the whole time you were here. See, never did me wrong. And I went after you on that road because Garrick told me to and because I was stop. See, I was who he made me into, and I went along with it, and that's mine to own." See, the yard was very quiet. See, Mara looked at Calder Rusk, at the man who'd humiliated her at the gate, who'd scattered her things across the road, whose boot had hung in the air above her hand, and felt something that was not forgiveness exactly, but was adjacent to it. See, complicated by anger. Complicated by the awareness that she'd seen Garrick Voss operate for 14 months and understood exactly the machinery he used on people. See, "The sheriff is going to need more from you," she said. See, "I know. The criminal piece, the rustling, the cattle operation, that's not mine to resolve. See, that's the laws. I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. See, Fletcher was still watching her. "You can sleep in the bunkhouse tonight," she said. See, "Tomorrow you'll need to ride back to Ashford Crossing and make sure your account with the sheriff is complete." She paused. See, What happens after that depends on things I don't control. See, he nodded. His hands came down slowly. Calder, she said. See, he looked at her. Don't make me regret this. It wasn't a threat. See, she said it plainly. The way you say something, you mean literally. See, he held her gaze for a moment, with something behind his eyes that she read as shame, which was the appropriate response, and also more than she'd expected from him. See, no, ma'am, he said. Fletcher escorted him to the bunkhouse. See, Mara stood in the yard for a moment in the dark, listening to the night sounds of the ranch settle back around her. See, the land was the same land. The buildings were the same buildings. See, the same cold, the same distant noise of cattle in the pasture, the same particular smell of dry earth and cut grass, and the water barrels lined against the shed wall. See, but the weight of the place was different. She'd noticed it first when she walked back through the gate that morning. See, something she couldn't name precisely, a change in the quality of the air maybe, or in the way the ground held her weight. See, not lighter, not easier, just different in the way a thing is different when it becomes yours to answer for. See, she thought about Garrick riding out through the back gate. See, she thought about where he might be tonight on the road south, she suspected, riding toward whatever next town was far enough from Cinder Wash that the name didn't follow him. See, she thought about the anger she'd expected to feel watching him go and the complicated absence of it. See, what she felt instead was the clean awareness of a problem that had been removed, and the considerably less clean awareness of everything the problem had left behind. See, the dry well, the unpaid men, the broken fence line. See, the neighboring ranches that needed repair in a different way than the physical fences. See, the water ration that had kept workers drinking less than horses. See, the evidence of a man who'd believed that running a place meant owning the people in it, and who'd treated the land with the same extractive logic. See, none of that was fixed by Garrick leaving. That was the thing. See, his leaving was the beginning of fixing it, not the fix itself. See, she went back to the equipment shed. She sat on the cot with her grandfather's silver keepsake in her hand, turning it over in the dark. See, it was a simple thing, a pocket watch that no longer ran, the works long since gone, the case kept because it had his initials, and because there was a photograph inside so small and faded she could only make it out in good light. See, Elias at maybe 40, squinting into the sun, one hand raised against the glare. See, a man who had stopped beside a wrecked wagon train because it was the only thing to do. See, a man who had lived for 30 more years, without knowing that the act had outlasted him. See, without knowing that it would reach forward through time and find his granddaughter in a worn equipment shed and hand her something she hadn't known to ask for. See, she didn't believe in clean narratives. See, she'd seen enough of real life to know that stories weren't actually shaped like stories. They were jagged and incomplete, and the debts didn't always come due, and the good didn't always win, and sometimes you helped someone, and they took the water. See, and disappeared, and you were still on your own in the morning. See, that was most of it. That was what her 14 months at Iron Hollow had taught her, if nothing else. See, but then there was this specific and improbable arrangement of events. See, this exact night in this exact shed, with the keepsake in her hand, and her name on documents that hadn't been signed yet but would be. See, she didn't have words for it that she trusted. She just held the watch until the cold of it matched the warmth of her hand, and she couldn't feel the weight of it anymore, and then she set it on the shelf and lay down and let the night do the rest. See, she was still there when the morning came. That was what mattered. See, she was still there, and this time nobody could send her away. See, the morning after Calder came back, Mara moved into the main house. See, she didn't make a ceremony of it. She carried her canvas bag across the yard in the early gray light before anyone else was stirring, went through the front door, and stood in the front room for about 30 seconds looking at Garrick's furniture. See, then she went to the small room off the back hallway, not the main bedroom. See, which still smelled like him, and which she had no interest in occupying yet, and set her bag on the narrow bed that had been the housekeeper's room, back when Iron Hollow had a housekeeper. See, it was smaller than the main bedroom, and had a low window that looked out at the back fence line and the scrub brush beyond it. See, it suited her fine. See, the first thing she did after that was open every window in the house that would open, which in the cold morning air made the place feel less like a held breath and more like something that could belong to people who were actually living in it. See, the smell shifted. Not gone, some things take longer than open windows, but diluted enough that the rooms felt less like Garrick's and more like the space she was going to make them into something else. See, she was in the kitchen, starting a fire in the stove, when Webb knocked on the back door. See, Carl Dern is in Ashford Crossing, he said. Portis went to town last evening and asked around. See, Dern's free this week. She'd mentioned Dern to Rowan the day before, but hadn't had time to pursue it. See, how far out can he come today? Portis says he knows this land already. See, some work he did on the Cray spread 3 years back. See, he'll know the basin geology. Good. Send word that I want him out here tomorrow morning. See, early, she thought, and ask him what he charges before he comes. See, I'm not going to negotiate with a man standing in my yard. I want to know the number before I agree to it. See, Webb nodded. He started to turn away, and the canyon clearance Fletcher got word from Ashford Crossing this morning. See, sheriff's moving today. They want you there at midday. See, the canyon. She'd been expecting it, but hearing the time made it real in a different way. See, I'll be ready. She was ready. What she wasn't ready for was Aldous Cray being already at the canyon when she arrived. See, she'd assumed she'd have some buffer that the neighboring ranchers would come later in the process, after the sheriff had managed the initial clearance and the cattle counts were underway. See, that she'd have some version of control over the meeting's conditions. See, instead she rode up to the canyon entrance with Fletcher at her side and found Aldous Cray standing 20 feet from the locked gate with his hat in his hands and 2 of his own riders behind him. See, watching the sheriff's men move through the pens with count boards. See, he was older than she'd remembered from the supply runs. See, somewhere north of 60, with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of outdoor work and not from any particular softness in his life. See, he wasn't a tall man. He didn't need to be. He had the settled quality of someone who'd been arguing with this land for long enough that they'd arrived at a mutual understanding. See, he looked at her when she dismounted. See, his eyes did the thing that older men's eyes sometimes did when they saw her, the rapid recalculation, the adjustment from the expectation they'd brought with them to the reality that was standing in front of them. See, he managed it faster than most. You're the Ellison girl, he said. See, Mara Ellison. Yes. She walked toward him. You're Aldous Cray. See, I've been Aldous Cray for 63 years, so I expect so. He looked at her for a moment. See, Garrick Voss used to have his people run mine off this road. See, I know, she said. That's not the operation I'm running. See, so I heard. He glanced toward the pens, where the sheriff's deputies were moving cattle through narrow sorting chutes, reading brands. See, my count said I was short 31 head over 8 months. See, you know what 31 head means to an operation my size. See, she did know. She'd done the rough math when Rowan had told her the neighboring ranches were involved. See, for a mid-sized spread, 31 head wasn't catastrophic. See, it was the kind of loss that accumulated, that pushed decisions that otherwise wouldn't need to be made, that created pressure on margins that were already thin. See, it means a hard year, she said, and probably decisions you shouldn't have had to make. See, he looked at her again, recalibrating in a different direction. See, you're not what I expected. What did you expect? See, Mercer's representative. Some man in a good coat who'd tell me my cattle were being returned, and I should be grateful. He glanced at Fletcher, who was maintaining a polite distance. See, that's not what this is. No, she said. This is me telling you that what Garrick did to your operation was wrong. See, that I'm sorry it happened, and I'm sorry it happened under the name of Iron Hollow. See, and that I intend for this valley to work differently going forward. See, he turned his hat in his hands. The movement was slow, considered. See, what does differently mean, practically? It means the water station I'm building at the main trail junction is going to be available to your riders the same as mine. See, it means if your fence line gets a problem near the Iron Hollow boundary, you send someone to talk to me, and I'll send someone out rather than waiting for a dispute. See, it means if there's a hard season and one operation has something another needs, we talk before we fight over it. She paused. See, I've watched what happens when ranches in a drought treat every drop of water like it's a war. See, everybody loses faster. It was quiet for a long moment. See, The sound of cattle moving through the pens filled the space, the particular low complaint of animals being handled, the occasional sharp instruction from a deputy. "See, your grandfather," he said finally. She stilled. "You knew him?" "See, not personally. My father did. Elias Ellison came through this valley before I was born. See, my father said he was the kind of man who he stopped. See, started again. He said there weren't many men like that. See, she didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't diminish it. See, Cray put his hat back on. You get me my 31 head verified and returned by the end of the week. I'll consider the matter settled between our operations." He held out his hand. "See, and I'll tell my riders that Iron Hollow's boundary is a place they can ask for help if they need it." See, she shook his hand. His grip was dry and firm, and she matched it. "See, end of the week," she said. "You have my word." He nodded once and walked back toward his riders, and that was the end of the conversation. See, clean. Undecorated. The way things worked when both people knew what they were actually talking about. See, Fletcher appeared at her shoulder. 31 head verified by Friday. See, make sure the count is right before we commit them, she said. See, I told him my word. That means I need to know what my word is worth before I give it. See, understood. A pause. You handled that well. She looked at him. See, were you expecting me not to? He considered this with the measured candor she'd come to expect from him. See, I was expecting it to be more complicated. It was complicated, she said. See, he just didn't make me work for it in front of him. See, that's different. Rowan came back on Thursday. See, he arrived without the formal advance notice, which she was starting to understand was his preferred mode, not from any desire to catch people unawares. See, but because he found announcement rituals inefficient and the people worth dealing with didn't need a formal entrance to show themselves at their best. See, he rode in mid-morning with Fletcher and one other rider, dismounted in the yard, and walked toward her with the directness that was simply how he moved through spaces. See, she was at the secondary well site with Carl Dern, who had arrived Tuesday morning at 6:15 and had spent 2 days doing things with soil samples and a hand-carved measuring rod that she didn't entirely follow but was beginning to trust. See, Dern was a compact man in his 50s with knuckle-scared hands and the conversational style of someone who thought words were a finite resource worth conserving. See, Rowan looked at the excavation Dern's assistant had started beside the collapsed well. See, what's the finding, he said. Dern glanced at Mara. See, she gave him a slight nod. It was his assessment, his to present. See, the original well failed because it was sited wrong, Dern said. See, whoever put it in was reading surface indicators and not going deep enough in the assessment. See, the water table here runs 8 feet lower than where the well terminated. See, they hit a perched water pocket, sat fine for years, then the drought dropped that level and they had nothing. He looked at the excavation. See, I can put in a properly sited replacement 40 yards east. See, you'll hit the main table, which is consistent. Not going to solve your drought problem, but it's not going to disappear on you in a dry year, the way this one did. See, timeline, Rowan said, 2 weeks with the right crew. See, I've got 2 men I use. They're available. Rowan looked at Mara. See, your call. She'd been working toward this specific moment in her head since Tuesday, the first real decision that cost real money, coming in front of Rowan before she'd developed the fluency to make it without feeling watched. See, she understood that the operational agreement gave her authority. See, she also understood that authority and confidence were different muscles, and one of them was newer than the other. See, do it, she said to Dern. Start Monday. I want it functional before the summer heat sets in. See, Dern nodded, made a note in the small book he kept in his shirt pocket, and walked back to his assistant without fanfare. See, Rowan watched him go. Then he looked at Mara. You didn't ask me. See, it's my call. You said so. Yes, then I don't need to ask. She paused. See, I'm telling you. Because you have a financial stake, and you should know what decisions are being made. See, that's different from asking permission. He looked at her with the expression she still hadn't fully decoded. See, not approval, exactly something more neutral than that, more like the recognition of a fact he'd already known, but was finding confirmed. See, the papers are ready, he said. The formal operating agreement. See, the lawyers finished them yesterday. Her hands wanted to do something she wasn't sure what. See, she kept them at her sides. All right, we can sign them today if you want. See? Or I can leave them for you to read first. Leave them. See? I'm going to read them. I expected you to say that. See? Then why did you offer the alternative? Because expecting something and giving the person the choice are different things. He said it without any emphasis on the lesson of it, which was how she knew it was one. See, she almost smiled. How long are you staying? Through the weekend. See? There are some things I want to walk through with you on the eastern fence line, the section near the canyon. He paused. See? And there are some conversations you and I still need to have. See? About my grandfather. Among other things. She looked at the half-excavated well site. See? At the yellow-brown earth turned up around the edges of the old failure, and the 40 yards to the east where Dern had marked the new location with a length of wooden stake. See? There was something about it she found both discouraging and clarifying, the fact that the original well had failed because someone had done the assessment wrong, had read the surface and called it enough. See? The mistake wasn't laziness, it was insufficient depth. See? It was stopping before you reached what was actually there. See, tonight, she said. After supper. We can talk then. See? But the afternoon was not finished with her yet. See? She was checking the east pasture fence line around 3 o'clock. She'd started doing the perimeter rides herself every other day. See? Partly for the survey she'd promised herself, and partly because it was easier to think on horseback than standing still when she saw the rider coming from the south. See? Not one of hers. The horse was a roan she didn't recognize, and the rider was moving at a pace that wasn't casual. See? She pulled up and waited. He was maybe 40, wearing the kind of clothes that traveled in practical worn, no affiliation she could read. See? He slowed as he approached, taking in the fence line and the iron hollow markings. See? Looking for the owner, he said. You found her, Mara said. See? He did the recalculation. Managed it reasonably well. See? You're Ellison? I am. He reached into his coat and produced a folded letter. See? From Garrick Voss. She took it, held it without opening it. See? When did you see him 2 days ago? South Road, toward Redding Pass. He paused. See? He paid me to deliver this. Just delivery, I don't have any other stake in it. See? She believed him, or believed it enough. Thank you for bringing it. See? He tipped his hat and rode back south the way he'd come. See? She watched him go, then looked at the letter in her hand. See? The handwriting on the outside was Garrick's. She recognized it from the ledgers. See? Her name, no address, sealed with plain wax. She didn't open it on the fence line. See? She finished the perimeter ride and brought the horse back to the stable and unsaddled him herself. And then she went to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee from the supplies that were better than anything she'd had access to when she worked here. See? Because Garrick had kept the good coffee for the main house, and this was now her kitchen, and she could have the good coffee. See? She sat at the table and opened the letter. It was 2 pages in Garrick's cramped hand. See? She read it twice. The first page was what she expected the defensive architecture of a man rewriting his own history in real time. See? The cattle operation had been necessary. The debt situation had been misrepresented. See? Mercer Continental had unfair terms. He'd built Iron Hollow from a failing claim and deserved better than what had happened. See? She read it with the flat attention of someone processing a document they already understand the shape of. See? The second page was not what she expected. It was shorter. See? The handwriting was different, not in style, but in pressure, like he'd written it at a different moment than the first page, when something had changed in him between one and the other. See? You were the best worker I had, and I knew it, and I paid you less than the men because it was what I could get away with. See? That was wrong. The water was wrong. Sending you out without your wages was wrong. See? I'm not asking you to say otherwise. I'm telling you because it needed to be said, and you were owed it, and I'm too far south now for you to throw it back at me. See? I know what you're going to do with that ranch. You're going to make it into something I couldn't. See? That's not a compliment. It's just true. She sat with the letter for a long time. See? There was no return address. See? No indication of where he was going or what came next for him. The criminal investigation would find him. Eventually, she assumed, because those things usually did, but that was outside her control and not her weight to carry. See? She thought about what it would have cost him to write that second page. See? Garrick Voss had spent his life operating on the principle that acknowledgement was weakness, that admitting wrong was the same as surrendering leverage. See, he'd treated apology as a transaction that cost more than it returned. See, for him to write even that much compressed and conditional and still faintly self-serving around the edges, she understood what it had meant to write it, and she couldn't decide what she felt about that. See, not forgiveness. She wasn't there, maybe not ever. See, but something. She folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket and finished her coffee. See, that evening, after supper, she and Rowan sat at the table in the front room with the operating agreement between them and talked. See, not about the agreement initially. She'd read it that afternoon, all of it, every clause, which had taken an hour and a half and required her to ask Webb what 3 of the legal terms meant. See, which she did without embarrassment, because not knowing a term and not understanding the substance were different things. See, the terms were precise, and the provisions were what Rowan had described on the road. See, nothing hidden, nothing that changed shape when you read it slowly. See, what she wanted to talk about was Samuel Mercer. Tell me what he was like, she said. See, your father. Rowan set down his coffee. He looked at the table for a moment, then at her. See, stubborn, he said. In the way that people are stubborn when they've built something from very little, convinced that their method is the right method because it worked. See, slow to change his mind when he was wrong. He paused. See, generous in the way that people are generous when they remember what it was like to need. See, he never forgot what it was like to need something and not have it. See, she thought of Elias. My grandfather was generous the same way. See, I know. My father talked about him. Rowan's voice did the thing it did when he was being careful, slight slowing, the words placed rather than released. See, he said Ellison stopped at the wagon when everyone else on that road had assessed the situation and moved around it. See, my father asked him afterward why he stopped. He said Ellison looked at him like the question was confused. A pause. See, he said Ellison told him he stopped because there were people who needed help and he was a person who could help them. See, he said it like it was math. Mara pressed her lips together. See, he was like that. His logic was always very simple. She looked at the table. See, I used to think it was a character flaw when I was younger. See, the simplicity of it, it seemed like it would get him hurt. See, did it? Sometimes. She thought of Elias's last year's, the money that ran out because he'd lent it to people who didn't come back with it, the claim that shrank because he'd sold parcels to families that couldn't pay full price. See, none of it catastrophic, none of it without cost. He never seemed to think the cost was too high. See, I think I understand that better now than I did. Rowan watched her. See, what changed? Yesterday I paid 4 men 6 weeks of back wages out of the startup capital. See, and I watched their faces when they got it. And I thought Garrick sat on that money. See, he watched those men work for 6 weeks, knowing they weren't getting paid, and he sat on it. And the thing that bothers me most isn't even the theft. See, it's that he watched people do honest work and decided the money was worth more than the fairness. She picked up her coffee cup and set it down without drinking. See, my grandfather's logic starts making more sense when you see the alternative clearly enough. See, Rowan was quiet for a moment. You said this morning that you were going to read the agreement before signing it. See, I read it. And she looked at him, one clause. See, Section 11, Paragraph 3. The provision about land improvement costs. See, he waited. It says that improvements to infrastructure come out of the operating account before revenue split, she said. See, that means the well repair, the fence work, the water station I'm building on the trail, all of that reduces my share of the revenue for the period it's being paid back. See, that's standard for this type of arrangement. I know it's standard. See, I'm not saying it's unfair. She kept her eyes on his. See, I'm saying that if I run this place the way I intend to run it, I'm going to be making a lot of infrastructure improvements in the first 2 years. See, because Garrick didn't. Because he extracted and didn't reinvest. See, which means my revenue share is going to be close to nothing for 2 years while I'm doing the correct thing for the long-term health of the operation. See, he held her gaze. Yes. So either the clause needs to be modified to create an up on how much infrastructure cost can be applied per revenue period, or the startup capital needs to be structured differently. She paused. See, I've written out the modification I want in Section 11. See, it's on the back of the last page. He reached for the document and turned to the last page. See, he read what she'd written. His expression didn't change in any obvious way, but she'd become attentive to the subtler shifts, and she saw something adjust. See, you want a fixed annual cap on infrastructure cost recovery, he said. See, above that cap, the additional costs extend the debt retirement period rather than reducing current revenue share. See, that way I'm not being penalized for repairing what Garrick broke. See, the improvements still get paid for it, just comes off the back end of the debt timeline rather than out of the operating account in the first years when the operation is most fragile. See, he set the document down. He looked at her with that expression again, the neutral one that wasn't neutral at all. See, you wrote this today, after I read the agreement this afternoon. See, yes, you've never negotiated a contract before. See, I've never had anything worth negotiating for before. She kept her voice even. See, is it a reasonable modification? He was quiet for a long moment. See, not hesitating, thinking, which she'd learned was different. See, then yes, it's reasonable. Another pause, shorter. See, it's more than reasonable. My lawyers would have been embarrassed to miss it. See, then we can add it before I sign. We can add it before you sign. He picked up the document again. See, any other modifications? No, the rest is what you said it was. See, he nodded. He reached into his coat for a pen and wrote the modification in his own hand at the bottom of Section 11, referencing her addendum. See, his handwriting was cleaner than she expected, controlled, legible, each letter placed. See, he signed the modification, dated it, and pushed the document toward her. See, she signed it, dated it, set the pen down. The room was quiet enough that she could hear the night sounds outside, the wind moving through the fence posts, the distant sound of cattle settling. See, the lamp on the table threw a warm circle that made the edges of the room feel further away than they were. See, there's something else, Rowan said. She waited. The investigation is wrapping up faster than expected. See, the evidence my men gathered from the canyon is comprehensive, and Calder Rusk's statement was more complete than anyone anticipated. He paused. See, the sheriff in Ashford Crossing has issued a warrant for Garrick's arrest. See, he won't be returning to Cinderwash. She thought of the letter in her coat pocket. See, I received a letter from him this afternoon. Rowan was still. See, he's south of Redding Pass, she said. I don't know exactly where. See, he paid a rider to deliver it. She paused. I'm going to give it to the sheriff. See, you read it? Yes. He waited, and she understood that he was not going to ask what was in it, which was its own kind of thing to notice about him. See, the first page was a justification, she said. What you'd expect. See, the second page was she stopped, chose the word. See, different. Rowan nodded. He didn't ask her to expand on it, and she didn't. See, they sat for a moment in the lamp-lit room with the signed agreement on the table between them, and the night settling around the ranch, and the sounds of the people on the property, her property now. See, in whatever way property can belong to someone when the ink is still fresh moving through their evening. See, my father, Rowan said eventually, not continuing anything. See, just placing it in the room. He used to say that the only debts worth carrying were the ones that made you a better person for having them. He looked at the lamp. See, he carried the debt to your grandfather for 30 years. See, I don't think he resented it. I think he was grateful for it. See, because it reminded him. Because it showed him something about the kind of person he wanted to be. He looked at her. See, you've done something similar, whether you intended to or not. See, you gave water to a hurt man and lost your job for it, and you weren't doing it to be repaid. See, you were doing it because your grandfather's voice in your head was louder than Garrick's rules. See, she looked at the table. I was also terrified, she said. See, I want to be clear about that. I wasn't calm and certain. See, I was 18 years old in the cold, and I knew exactly what it would cost me, and I was scared. See, I just did it anyway. I know, he said. That's the part that matters. See, courage that doesn't involve fear isn't courage. It's just confidence. See, she looked at him. Did your father tell you that? See, he told me a lot of things. See, something in his face shifted briefly. Grief, she thought. Or the particular quality of grief that comes when someone has been gone long enough that you can look at the loss directly without it breaking you, but it can still catch you sideways. See, he'd have liked to meet you. She didn't say anything to that. See, she sat with it, the way you sit with things that are too complicated for the kind of response that language can provide. See. After a while, Rowan stood and gathered his coat and said, "Good night," with the same directness he applied to everything. And she walked him to the door, and he went across the yard to the guest room that Webb had set up in the bunkhouse's back section. See, she stood in the doorway of the main house for a moment. See, the yard was dark and settled. The lamp from the bunkhouse window made a small rectangle of warmth on the ground outside it. See, somewhere beyond the fence line, a coyote started a conversation with something she couldn't hear, and after a moment stopped. See, she thought about the well, the old one that had failed because the assessment didn't go deep enough, and the new one 40 yards east, where Dern's stake marked the correct location. See, she thought about the operating agreement on the table behind her with the modification written in 2 different hands. See, she thought about the letter in her coat pocket, 2 pages in Garrick's cramped handwriting, and the second page that had cost him something real. See, she thought about Elias on the road, 30 years ago, stopping beside the wagon, because there were people who needed help, and he was a person who could give it. See, the math of it, the simplicity of it. She thought about what that one simple decision had reached forward and done. See, through 30 years, and a boy named Samuel who had lived when he might have died, and a man named Rowan who had come to Cinder Wash looking for an orphaned girl working for 60 cents on the dollar. See, and a night at a well in a drought when she'd done the same calculation her grandfather had done and arrived at the same answer. See, she pulled the door closed behind her. She was not Elias. See, she was not going to be Elias. She was her own person with her own particular edges and failures, and a temper she'd learned to manage, but that still showed up in her jaw when she was pushed. See, and a distrust of authority that had kept her safe, but had also kept her from asking for help when she needed it. See, she had things to learn that she hadn't learned yet, and decisions ahead of her that were going to be hard in ways she couldn't anticipate. See, and the well wasn't dug yet, and the fence line wasn't fixed, and Aldous Cray's 31 head hadn't been delivered. See, but the agreement was signed, and this, the yard, the fence line, the lamp in the bunkhouse window, the sound of cattle in the night pasture, this was hers. See, not Garrick's anymore. Not borrowed, not conditional on someone else's permission, not held at 60 cents on the dollar of what she was actually worth. See, hers. She went inside and blew out the lamp and lay down in the housekeeper's small room with the window that faced the back fence line, and she listened to the night until she stopped listening and slept instead. See, and the ranch kept its sounds around her the way land keeps its sounds indifferent and permanent and entirely real. See, the rain came on a Tuesday, not a dramatic rain, not the kind that announces itself with thunder and the smell of lightning and a sky that turns green before the water hits. See, this was quieter than that. Mara was in the yard before dawn checking the water station post that Trace had set the afternoon before, the one that would anchor the covered trough at the trail junction. See, and she felt the first drops on the back of her neck and thought for a moment that she'd imagined it. See, she stood still and turned her face up, and the drops came again, soft and irregular, the way rain comes, when it's not sure yet whether it's committed to the effort. See, by the time the hands were up and moving, the drops had found their rhythm. See, by midday the earth was doing what dry earth does when water finally reaches it, after a long refusal, pulling it in with a kind of desperation that wasn't elegant, the ground going dark in uneven patches. See, the dust turning to a thin paste that stuck to boots and smelled like something being unlocked. See, the creek bed to the north, which had been a pale scar in the landscape for 7 months, began to show a dark line at its center. See, Webb stood in the yard with his hat off and his face up, which was not a thing she'd ever seen Webb do in 14 months. See, he was not a demonstrative man. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then put his hat back on and went back to work. See, she watched him do it and felt something in her chest that was too large for the moment and too appropriate for it simultaneously. See, this was the valley coming back to itself, slowly, provisionally, with no guarantee of how long it would last, but coming back. See, and Iron Hollow, for the first time in longer than she'd been there, was in a position to receive it correctly. See, the new well was 7 days from completion. Dern had confirmed the depth and the consistency of the water table and had stopped being reserved about his optimism, which from Dern meant something. See, the collapsed secondary well's replacement was funded and scheduled. See, the water station at the trail junction would be finished by the end of the week. See, the herd count was verified and stable. Aldous Cray had his 31 head back. She'd ridden them over herself with Portis and 2 other hands on a Thursday morning. See, and Cray had met them at his fence line and counted the animals himself, and when the count matched, he'd nodded at her with the particular economy of a man who considers a kept word its own form of eloquence. See, the eastern fence line was repaired. The section Garrick had let go near the canyon, the soft boundary she'd suspected was deliberate, was now properly strung with 4 strands of wire and corner posts that would hold. See, Decker had done most of that work, which surprised her until she watched him at it. He had a methodical quality that Garrick's inattention to him had never let develop into anything visible. See, she'd put him in charge of the fence crew, and he'd accepted it with the carefully contained expression of someone who'd been waiting to be asked. See, the 4 unpaid men had their back wages. The water ration was gone full working allotment every day, same as the animals. See, the kitchen in the main house was producing food that was actually food rather than the minimum caloric calculation Garrick had operated on. See, small things. Things that didn't appear in any document or ledger. See, things that a person only noticed if they'd experienced the absence of them. See, she was noticing them constantly, and she thought she would keep noticing them for a long time, which was probably the right response. See, the morning of the rain, she also received a letter from the sheriff's office in Ashford Crossing. See, she read it standing at the kitchen table without sitting down. See, Garrick Voss had been located south of Redding Pass and taken into custody 2 weeks prior. See, the criminal charges related to the cattle operation were formally filed. See, the civil proceedings would take months. The lawyers had explained this to her already. The particular grinding timeline of the law doing its accounting, but the piece that directly affected Iron Hollow was resolved. See, the property was hers under the operating agreement. See, no legal challenge was possible. The letter was informational, not requiring a response. See, she set it on the table, poured her coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the rain make the yard darker and the air smell like something living. See, she had known this was coming. She had been told it was handled by Rowan's lawyers, and then by the sheriff's office, and then by the operating agreement itself, which was specific and documented, and left nothing to interpretation. See, knowing a thing and receiving the official letter confirming it were different things. See, and she gave herself the 30 seconds it took to feel the difference fully before she put the letter in the drawer with the operating agreement and the modification written in 2 hands and went back to the morning. See, there was still the matter of Calder Rusk. See, he'd stayed on at the ranch through the first 2 weeks, keeping himself useful in the way people keep themselves useful when they're trying to demonstrate that they've changed enough to be worth keeping. See, he'd been to Ashford Crossing twice for conversations with the sheriff's office about his testimony in the Garrick case. See, he'd come back both times quieter than he'd left, which she read as the particular quiet of someone learning the weight of their own account. See, he was good with horses. She hadn't fully known this about him because Garrick had used him as a foreman and not as a horseman, but she'd watched him in the stable, and the quality was real, the patient. See, specific attention that horses respond to, the ability to be still in the right way. See, Portis had mentioned it to her without advocacy, just as information. See, she was checking the fence near the stable one afternoon when he came out of the barn and stopped when he saw her. See, they hadn't had a direct conversation since the night he'd come back to the yard with his hands raised. See, they'd occupied the same space, passed each other with the civil acknowledgement of people operating in professional proximity, and said nothing of substance. See, she'd been waiting. Not performing patience, actually waiting, because some conversations needed to wait until the right amount of time had passed for both people to know what they were actually saying. See, the sheriff's office sent their final request for my statement last week, he said. See, he stopped at a distance that wasn't confrontational and wasn't retreating either. See, I gave them everything. Brand records, dates, the names of the traders Garrick used south of Reading Pass. He paused. See, everything. I know, she said. They told me. He looked at the fence post she was checking, then at her. See, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me straight. See, I'll try. Do you want me here? He said it the way people say things when they've been rehearsing them, and then, at the last moment, decide to say the shorter version. See, not whether I can be useful, whether you want me here. See, because if you don't, I'll go. I won't make trouble, and I won't make a scene. See, I'll just go. She looked at him. At the man she'd watched humiliate her at the gate, scatter her things across the road, hold his boot above her hand. See, at the man who'd come back to the yard in the dark with his hands raised and his foreman's posture entirely gone. See, people were not consistent. She'd had plenty of time in the last several weeks to be reminded of that. See, the person capable of cruelty and the person capable of returning to face it were often the same person, and the logic of that was uncomfortable in a way she thought it was probably supposed to be uncomfortable. See, you're good with the horses, she said. That's not what I asked. See, no, she held his gaze. I know it's not. She took a breath. See, I don't know yet. I want to be honest with you about that because I think you're owed the honest answer and not a managed one. She paused. See, what I know is that you've done what I asked. You went to the sheriff. You gave your statement. You've pulled your weight here. See, I know what you were before, and I watched you try to be something different, and I don't know yet what you actually are. She kept her voice even. See, but I'm not sending you away on the basis of what Garrick made of you, if you're genuinely done being that person. See, what I'm sending you away on, if it comes to it, is what you choose from here. See, he was quiet for a moment. Something worked in his jaw. See, that's fair. It's what I've got, she said. Take it or leave it. See, he nodded. He went back to the stable. She went back to the fence. See, it wasn't a resolution. It was exactly what she'd said, an open account, without the clean closure that stories were supposed to have. See, real things didn't close like stories. See, they stayed open and complicated and required ongoing attention. And that was true of fence lines and water tables and the people who'd been shaped badly by someone else's control and were trying to figure out what shape they actually were. See, she was learning to sit with open accounts. She was not always comfortable with it. See, she sat with it anyway. Rowan came back at the end of the third week. See, she'd been expecting him. By the end of the month, the operating agreement included a quarterly review structure, and the first review was approaching. See, and she'd been preparing for it the way she prepared for everything now, which was thoroughly and slightly too early. See, she had the numbers. She had the infrastructure timeline. See, she had the revised herd projections that Dern's water table assessment had made possible better than the conservative estimates from the first week. See, because the main well was now drawing consistent, and the new secondary was within days of completion. See, but he arrived before the review date, and when he rode into the yard, she could tell immediately that this wasn't a review visit. See, it was the way he sat on the horse, not the operational posture she'd come to read as his default when there was business to conduct, but something looser, less directed. See, like a man who'd arrived at a destination and not an agenda. See, she was at the water station site when he came in, supervising the final placement of the covered trough that would make the structure actually functional. See, Trace had done good work on the framing solid, nothing decorative about it, just well made. See, the trough itself was cedar, properly sealed, wide enough for 3 horses at once. See, she heard Fletcher call her name and turned to see Rowan crossing the yard toward her. See, the trough, he said, looking at it. Almost finished, she said. See, by tomorrow morning it'll be ready. He looked at the structure for a moment, the simple functionality of it, the sign she'd had web paint in clean lettering, water. See, free. No questions. You're putting it at the trail junction. See, it's the busiest point. Travelers coming from either direction hit it before they decide whether to continue to Ashford Crossing or turn south. She paused. See, anybody hurt, anybody turned away somewhere, anybody who needs water and doesn't have the means to pay for it, they'll find it here before they have to make the decision that Garrick made. See, he looked at her. The decision he made about you, she said. See, that night. That was a decision every person on this road is vulnerable to. See, someone with water choosing not to give it. I'm not willing to be that person, and I'm not willing for this ranch to be that place. See, he was quiet for a moment. You know this costs you something. See, operating the trough, maintaining it, restocking in dry periods. See, I know. And you built it into the operating projections? See, line item. Water station maintenance, annual estimate. She held his gaze. See, it's in the numbers I'm presenting at the review. See, something crossed his face that might have been the closest thing to undone she'd seen from him. See, he controlled it quickly, which she thought was probably the product of years of practice, but she'd seen it. See, she filed it away. My father, he said, would have. See, I know, she said quietly. He nodded. He looked at the trough. See, he didn't say anything else for a moment, and she let the moment exist without filling it. See, they did the quarterly review that evening, proper and thorough, the way she insisted on doing everything that had numbers attached to it. See, she'd prepared 3 documents, a current account of the operating costs and revenues for the first 3 weeks, an infrastructure timeline with completion dates and projected costs for the remainder of the year. See, and a herd projection built on the new water table data. See, Rowan read all 3 without interruption. See, she sat across the table and watched him read, which was something she'd gotten comfortable doing. Watching the way people processed information told her things about them that the information itself didn't. See, the herd projection is more optimistic than your initial estimate, he said when he set the last document down. See, Dern's water table data changed the calculus. With consistent water access through the summer, the grazing capacity on the east pasture goes up by about 18% over what Garrick's degraded well situation was limiting it to. She paused. See, I'm not counting on the rain. That's a variable. I'm counting on the infrastructure, which isn't a variable anymore. See, the trail water station is in here. Line item 23. See, I see it. He set the document down. You've been thorough. See, you gave me something worth being thorough about. See, he looked at her across the table. Mara. She waited. See, I need to tell you something that's not in the operational agreement and isn't about the numbers. See, she kept her expression even. All right, I'm leaving the territory at the end of the month. He said it plainly, the way he said things that had been decided. See, the rail operations in the Northern District need direct oversight. There's a land dispute that's been mismanaged by my regional people, and it requires me to be present. See, I'll be in the Northern Territory for 6 months, possibly longer. See, she absorbed this. Fletcher stays as long as you want him. He paused. See, the communication chain stays intact. Monthly reports, which you've already established. See, the review structure continues. Nothing changes operationally. See, but you won't be here. No, she looked at the table. See, then at him. Why are you telling me separately from the operational matters? You could have put it in the review. See, because I wanted to tell you directly, as a paused, choosing. See, as a person, not as a party to the operating agreement. See, she considered that. The distinction mattered to him, and she thought she understood why he was a man who kept things in their correct categories, who was meticulous about what was professional and what was personal. See, and telling her this as a person rather than a party was him deliberately crossing his own line. See, it was not a small thing for him. I'll be fine, she said. See, I know you will. A pause. That's not why I wanted to tell you directly. See, she looked at him. His expression was the open one, not the controlled one, not the operational one. See, the one that appeared occasionally and briefly, and that she'd spent several weeks learning to see for what it was. See, then why, she said. See, because I've spent 3 weeks watching you turn a failing operation into something that's going to outlast everything Garrick Voss built here, and I wanted to tell you that before I left, not in a letter and not through Fletcher. He held her gaze. See, because my father would have been glad to know you. See, and because he stopped. The pause was longer than his usual ones. See, because I'm glad I found you, even the way it happened. See, which was not particularly dignified. She thought of him at the well. See, blood in the dark, the ladle, 2 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder, and the sharp gray eyes that were alert when everything else had given up. See, you were fairly dignified, she said, considering. See, I was lying in the dirt by a well. You thanked me. See, you said, please. She held his gaze. Some men in better condition than that don't manage it. See, he almost smiled. It was the nearest he got, usually. See? All right, he said. And I'll be back before the end of the year. See? I'll have numbers for you when you are. I expect you will. See? He looked at her one more moment. See? Then he gathered the documents, set them in order, and stood, and she walked him to the door the way she'd been walking him to doors since the first evening. And he said good night with the same directness and went across the yard to the bunkhouse. See? She stood in the doorway. The rain had come back in the evening, softer now, a steady, thin rain that didn't demand anything of the land, but was giving it what it needed. See? The yard was dark, and the lamp in the bunkhouse made its rectangle of warmth, and the creek to the north was audible for the first time in 7 months, a small sound that was really just moving water. See? Which was not a complicated thing, but was not nothing either. See? She thought about what he'd said, the way he'd said it. See? The careful crossing of his own line. She was not a person who constructed conclusions from incomplete information, and this, whatever it was, see, whatever it might become across the distance of 6 months, and a northern land dispute, and the ongoing and non-glamorous work of rebuilding a ranch, was incomplete information. See, she knew that clearly. See, she was also 18 years old, and had learned in the past 3 weeks that she was capable of considerably more than 60 cents on the dollar of what she was actually worth. And whatever came next, she intended to approach it at full value. See, she went inside and made herself a second cup of coffee and sat at the table in the front room that was her front room, and she was still sitting there when the lamp burned low and she finally went to bed. See, the morning Rowan rode out for the Northern Territory, she was at the water station. See, not waiting for him, actually working. The trough was filled and the sign was up, and she was checking the cedar seal on the far end, where Trace had flagged a small gap the day before. See, she heard the horses and looked up, and he was at the trail junction with Fletcher and 2 other riders headed north. See, he slowed when he reached the station. He looked at the trough, then at the sign. See, then at her. She wiped her hands on her work pants. See, gap in the cedar, she said. Trace caught it. It's fine. See, good. They looked at each other across the distance of the trail. See, 6 months, she said. He held her gaze. See, take care of this valley. It's going to take care of itself, she said. See, I'm just trying not to get in the way of that. He nodded. See, then he rode north, and Fletcher touched the brim of his hat to her as he passed, and the riders went with them. And the trail junction was quiet with just the sound of the trough filling from the pipe. Trace had run from the main supply. See, the thin water sound of something being offered freely. See, she watched the riders disappear into the distance. See, she thought about the night at the well, the impossible choice that hadn't felt like a choice at all. See, the ladle, the cold air, the 5 seconds she'd counted, the man who'd told her in the dark that she hadn't lost her future. See, she thought about how a single action, not heroic, not dramatic, just decent, could travel forward through time and arrive in places you couldn't have imagined from the moment of its origin. See, as Elias had stopped beside a wagon, a man named Samuel had lived. See, a boy named Rowan had grown into a man who kept his father's debts. See, a girl named Mara had given water in the dark, and here was the water station, and here was the valley, and here was the improbable and specific present moment that had been built from all of it. See, she didn't think this was the end of anything. She'd been around long enough, and 18 was long enough, if the years had been the right kind, to know that resolution was not the same as completion. See, the ranch had debts that would take years to retire. See, the land had damage from the drought that would take longer than that to fully recover. See, the neighboring relationships were repaired in the way that early repairs are repaired, which is carefully, with awareness of the newness of them. See, there was Decker and whatever Decker was going to become. See, there was Portis and his reading and his fair wages demand and the way he'd started showing up early to the morning meetings, not asked but just there, attentive. See, there was Calder in the stable with the horses, doing the work, the account between them still open, still being written. See, there was Webb with his hat off in the rain, and Trace with his solid fence work and his careful cedar gap, and the 4 men who'd worked 6 weeks without wages and had stayed because leaving meant the road. See, there was Carl Dern, 40 yards east of the original failure, drilling down to the real water table because someone had finally been willing to go deep enough to find it. See, there was her own name on the operating agreement, next to the modification written in 2 hands, and the 5 years between now and the ownership transfer that was going to be the hardest years of her life, and the best ones, probably. See, and she couldn't fully see them yet, which was both the terrifying and the correct thing about them. See, she finished checking the cedar seal. It was solid. See, Trace's early flag had been right, but the gap wasn't structural. A touch of additional sealer was all it needed, and she'd brought the right supplies with her. See, she sealed it, checked the water flow, looked at the sign one more time, water. See, free, no questions, and thought that Elias would have liked the directness of it. See, no poetry, no moral instruction, just the statement of what was available and the removal of the conditions. See, she gathered her tools and walked back toward the ranch. See, the rain had stopped in the night, but the air still held the feel of it. See, the land was dark and fragrant in the particular way of land that has been dry a long time and is remembering what it knows about being otherwise. See, there were green shoots along the fence line that had not been there a week ago. See, not many. Provisional and pale, the way new things are pale before they decide to be permanent. See, but there. She stopped and looked at them. She thought in the way you think things when you're alone and moving, and not trying to construct a thought that land was more patient than people. See, that it waited out the dry years with a persistence that wasn't stubborn because stubborn implied will, and the land didn't have will, it just had time. See, and when the water came, it responded at the level of its deepest structure, not from the surface. See, which was what Dern had been trying to explain about water tables and what she'd been listening to in his technical language and understanding in a different register simultaneously. See, you had to go deep enough. That was what it was. You had to go deep enough in the assessment of the land and in your understanding of the people and in your sense of what you owed to the place and what it owed to you, see, which was nothing in the transactional sense and everything in the sense of mutual obligation between a person and the ground they were committed to. See, Garrick had operated at the surface. He'd read surface indicators and called it enough. See, he'd treated the land and the people on it as resources to be extracted, and the result was the drought-cracked earth and the empty wells and the underpaid men and the missing cattle and the woman. See, thrown off the property for giving water to a hurt man. See, none of that was inevitable. That was the thing she kept coming back to. See, every single failure of Iron Hollow under Garrick was a choice. See, not one catastrophe, not one moment of bad luck or bad weather or a market that turned wrong. See, a long accumulation of small decisions, each one choosing extraction over investment, convenience over fairness, surface over depth. See, and the result was a place that was crumbling from the inside while it looked like a going concern from the road. See, she understood now, more fully than she had in those first days, why Rowan had offered her the ranch rather than a payment. See, money would have addressed the surface. See, this was the only thing that addressed the depth, putting in someone who understood what the place actually needed, which was not smarter management or better accounting, but a different fundamental principle about what land and people were for. See, land can be bought, power can be taken, but respect must be earned. See, that was what her grandfather had tried to tell her, in different words, over years of porches and dust devils and simple explanations that took her until now to fully inhabit. See, she resumed walking. The gate was ahead, the wooden arch with Iron Hollow in the crossbeam. See, she'd thought about changing the name and decided against it. The name wasn't the problem, and removing it felt like erasure, and she had no interest in pretending the history of the place was different than it was. See, what she was interested in was what came next, which was going to be defined by different acts than the ones that preceded it, and that was enough. See, she went through the gate. See, the yard received her the way it had started to receive her, not like a place she was entering, but like a place she was returning to, which is what home feels like when you've had enough time in it to stop bracing against it. See, Webb was at the fence post by the stable, repairing something that she'd have to ask him about later. See, Decker was crossing toward the east pasture with the fence kit she'd left him, his stride purposeful in the way it had become since she'd put him in charge of something, and he'd discovered that he knew how to be in charge of things. See, Portis was at the water barrel, filling a canteen before the morning's work. And he nodded at her when she passed, and she nodded back. And that was what it looked like when things were working. Not dramatic, not triumphant. See, just the ordinary functional motion of people doing their jobs with the confidence that the work mattered and would be recognized and paid. See, Calder came out of the stable. He saw her. She saw him. See, he held her gaze for a moment and then went to the fence line and got to work on the section she'd marked for repair 3 days ago. See, which she hadn't asked him to do yet. He'd seen the mark and was doing it without being told, which was its own form of language. See, she went to the main house. See, she made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with her morning list, which she kept on a single sheet of paper and rewrote each day because she found that the act of writing it clarified what was actually priority versus what just felt urgent. See, today's list was long but not impossible. The cedar check was done. See, the well final inspection was scheduled with Dern at 2. See, the letter to the Penitent Creek operation about the shared fence line section at the south boundary needed to go out today. See, the account books for the week needed to be reconciled before Friday. See, she looked at the list and felt the particular satisfaction of work that was real, not performed, not managed from a distance, not contracted to someone else because the details were too small to bother with. See, the details were the work. The details were what the place was made of. See, she wrote at the top of the list, in handwriting that wasn't elegant but was clear, first water station sign, check paint for weather. See, it was the smallest item on the list. She wrote it first because it mattered to her that the sign be readable. See, that anyone coming down that road, hurt or hungry, or just dry from a long journey, could read it from a distance and know there was something at the trail junction that was offered freely and without condition. See, she had been that person on that road. She intended for the road to be different now. See, she drank her coffee and went to work. Outside, the green shoots were catching the morning light along the fence line, pale and provisional, and there, which was enough. See, in 40 yards east of the original failure, Dern's new well was 2 days from completion. Drawing from the real water table, the one you reached only when you went deep enough. See, in the pasture, the cattle were moving in the early light, with the slow, purposeful motion of animals that had been watered and fed, and the sounds they made were the ordinary sounds of a place doing what it was meant to do. See, the rain would come again. Drought was not over. Drought was never over in a single rainfall. It retreated and returned, and the land held the memory of it the way people held the memory of hard years. See, not with resentment, but with the kind of caution that was really just wisdom. See, the dry years would come back. They always did. What mattered was whether the place was built to receive them correctly when they did, whether the wells were sited on the real water table and not the surface pocket. See, whether the people working the land were paid fairly enough to stay through the hard times, whether the relationships with the neighbors were honest enough to survive the stress of scarcity. See, that was what she was building. Not a perfect place. See, not a story with clean edges and an ending that tied up without remainder. See, a real place with real problems, managed by a real person who was 18 years old and had cracked ribs once herself and knew what water meant when you were thirsty, and someone was choosing whether to give it to you. See, Iron Hollow was no longer the place where Mara Ellison merely survived. See, it was the place she'd chosen, and the difference between a place you survive and a place you choose is not the place. See, it's the choosing. She refilled her coffee and looked at the list and started at the top. The work was waiting. She went to meet it.